Hello friends, and welcome to the channel, where we delve into the mind of a villain. In this entry, we'll be taking a look at Conrad Stonebanks from Expendables 3, as played by Mel Gibson, arguably the best villain in the series so far. A former expendable turned warlord, Stonebanks is particularly menacing due to his past relationship with Barney, who both served as co-founders of the Expendables. It's easy to resent a random stranger who becomes your antagonist, but the pain is far more significant when your enemy is someone who used to be as close as a brother. His past relationship with Barney also makes him privy to how he thinks, which makes him all the more dangerous. In his own words, he tells him that it's hard to beat an enemy when he's living inside your head. Stonebanks wasn't always evil. There was once a time when he could be considered a good man. While he was once a military operative proudly serving his nation, his descent into villainy began with two words: perceived unfairness. Over time, he eventually had enough of doing the dirty and dangerous work behind the scenes and receiving none of the recognition, while watching those in the spotlight reap the rewards of his blood and sweat. To make things worse, Stonebanks mentions he was treated as a loose end that had to be tied up. So in essence, he was the first expendable, one who was cut off when his usefulness was outlived. In the film, he goes further by using the term the deletables to describe his former colleagues, an indication of just how little worth society has for them. Feeling betrayed by the country he sacrificed so much for, he went rogue, renouncing his loyalty, and became an illegal arms dealer on foreign soil. The perceived unfairness, combined with the trauma of the government's betrayal, broke him and seared his conscience, making him numb to his atrocious acts. But the deepest wound would come when Barney and the rest of the Expendables were hired to assassinate him. Stonebanks was presumably executed by Barney, but survived due to his body armor. Over the years, Stonebanks would become a billionaire warlord, racking up a long list of crimes against humanity, with a special hatred for the country he once served. Old wounds are rehashed when his paths cross with Barney again. A recurring theme with Stonebanks is his ability to justify himself. While he is responsible for many deaths, directly or indirectly, Stonebanks argues that Barney and the rest of the Expendables are just as murderous, labeling them as killers just like himself, and tells them to look at themselves before casting judgment. Perhaps Stonebanks might have thought to himself that since his hands would be stained with blood just like Barney's, he might as well get rich doing it. After all, while this isn't said, Stonebanks could also justify himself by saying that he is merely the one supplying the weapons and not committing the act itself, as one would imagine most arms dealers would say. There is a certain level of vicariousness, some separation that would make him seem less guilty. The pursuit of wealth was also one of his driving factors, as he admits. Stonebanks mentions that it is far more lucrative to be the boss and criticizes Barney for remaining a small-minded employee. However, at present, Stonebanks already has more money than he will ever need, as seen when he splurges $300 million for a painting that he calls a piece of crud. He also mocks Barney's conscience, saying that his morality is what holds him back and makes him weak. In his mind, success is being willing to do whatever it takes, even if it means crossing into the morally corrupt zone. To deflect responsibility off himself, he says that in their dark business, it's the rule that only the baddest survive, and that he didn't make up the rules. But most of all, Stonebanks sees himself as a victim, betrayed by the men he once knew as brothers. There is a special bond among men who have to continually place their lives in each other's hands. Given their similar backgrounds, Stonebanks would assume that Barney would be readily able to empathize with his situation of being betrayed by the government and treated as a loose end. It's also probable that Stonebanks would have tried to sway Barney over to his side with the promise of a better life. By siding with the government and choosing to eliminate his former brother in arms, Stonebanks sees this as a betrayal on Barney's part. However, he doesn't emphasize with equal weight the fact that he has become the exact opposite of everything Barney has stood for. Ultimately, it was Stonebanks who was responsible for their falling out. He may have been a tragic victim with the government's betrayal, but it hardly absolves his actions as a war criminal. He has a particular grudge against Barney, which indicates how close they once were. As the closer the relationship, the greater the sense of betrayal. However, he doesn't shoot him given the chance, choosing to instead shoot one of his team, as he knows the emotional impact it will have on him. But while Stonebanks has a long list of reasons to defend himself, he knows he is still guilty overall. We see this in the scene where he looks at the painting of Cain and Abel. In a sense, Stonebanks sees himself as a parallel of Cain, who is exiled from his homeland and lived as a fugitive. He compares the mark of Cain with the mark of the Expendables tattooed on his arm. The mark that Cain was branded with by God ensured his survival, preventing others from killing him, while the mark of the Expendables, representing the skills that Stonebanks acquired as a mercenary, helped him to survive in a world where he was wanted dead. As a former mercenary, Stonebanks is naturally inclined to violence. His threats are peppered with violence described in graphic detail, as we see when he threatens to open up the Twilight Guy's meat shirt and show him his own heart. He also promises not to kill Barney with a weapon, but with his own hands to express the hurt of his betrayal. Stonebanks is also volatile, as seen when he executes several soldiers to vent his frustration. But despite his heinous acts, there is some humanity left in his conscience. Till present day, Stonebanks appears to still be remorseful over the deaths of the 3 Expendables that died during the mission to eliminate him, reminiscing them as brothers who ate and bled with him. He appears to have a daughter he loves, alluded to when he displays pity on Rhonda, saying that she reminds him of her. And despite having the ability to sell nuclear weapons, he chooses not to. While he jokes around, saying that it would kill his other customers, he also mentions that people are generally too emotional to own them. It could be suggested that he is concerned over the widespread destruction it would cause, destruction that he is not willing to face, especially in a world where his daughter still lives. For Stonebanks, being offered all the money in the world wouldn't be worth it. At the end, despite the past betrayal by the authorities, Conrad Stonebanks was a victim of his own greed and resentment, which separated him from his brotherhood and turned him into the enemy he used to fight against. So what do you think of Conrad Stonebanks, folks? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and take care.